Welcome everyone to another CTC software webinar. My name is Sean Zervis, Technical Evangelist at CTC, and today we're going to talk about Hive administration in the new Hive CMS and the new Hive platform. We're going to talk about everything pretty much that you need to know. And so let's kind of quickly just cover this real quick here. Really, the new Hive management portal helps you, the BIM managers, out. It allows far better federation of rights. It allows better control over what libraries and projects you've got. And we're constantly going to be making some improvements. Probably some of the questions that you might ask today will be some of the improvements that we've already got planned. That said, feel free to throw questions in the questions little panel there in GoToWebinar, and I'll try to answer them in line if I can while I'm going through the webinar itself. I try to keep an eye on that window if at all possible. Otherwise, I've got a huge questions and answers section at the end that we can sit there and kind of talk about any of those questions you might have. But really, we're going to go over absolutely everything I can possibly think of to cover about administering Hive, the CMS, the content management part, and the projects part, so that you hopefully won't have any or many questions when we're all done here. Really, we're going to talk about how to get access to the management portal in the first place. We're going to talk about configuring the CMS settings. We're going to create some users and user groups, which I primarily use with the CMS, but you can use it elsewhere as well. And we're also going to go ahead and create a couple of projects, or take a look at how you can create projects and organize those for reporting. We'll take a little tour through the actual reporting area itself. With that, let's talk first about the CMS. Anytime I'm getting somebody set up in Hive, most of the time it's going to be the CMS that we're talking about primarily. And so there's kind of a 5-step process that I recommend you always go through when you're getting Hive set up, just at its base level right away. And that 5-step process is to look at the CMS settings, the corporate-wide settings, getting those set up the way that you want, pretty much. You can always change your mind later, but getting it set up at least in a preliminary way. Creating some libraries. There's 4 libraries that I recommend most people start with. You might have some variants on that. We'll start with that. Getting content uploaded through the CMS. Doing some group configuration. I tend to do this while I'm uploading content because I can do them simultaneously with the web interface and the CMS at the same time. And some user creation once those first 4 steps are done, or mostly done. And so I want to take you in live, and we'll take a look at this as to how you can work with the Hive CMS and the management portal. Now, I'm going to escape out of this for a minute. I've already installed Hive, the CMS. And maybe I should take a step back and even talk about that a little bit. So I've downloaded this recently, actually a couple of times. Where we got here? Downloads, there we go. And there's the Hive 21 download right here. This is what you get when you download the latest Hive. You get the installation configuration guide, the user guide, general suites configuration, because there is a slight different setup for project analytics config. That's this guy right here. So you get that one. You've got the general CTC suites install, which works perfectly well for the Hive setup. And then there's 2 actual setup files inside here. The Hive setup MSI is what I ran to install the Hive CMS. I recommend installing this on all your Revit user workstations if that's how you're licensed. The Hive POW setup is an optional portion of Hive, the project activity logging part. We're going to talk about setting that up a little later, but you can install this as well and use the installation configuration guide for that, so you know how to pass all the parameters you need. And we'll talk about the licensing file that you'll need to get for this as well. But these are the 2 installs. The one that most people are usually the most interested in right away is the Hive setup, which is actually the CMS, the content management system, which I've already installed. So instead of me reinstalling that, what I'm going to do is just open up the Hive CMS. I believe I'm also logged in. Well, I guess I'm not logged in. Let's sign in for the first time. Well, not for the first time, but I'm going to sign in as myself. I'm signing in as a company admin here. which I'm assuming most of you are going to be signing in as well, a company admin, giving you full rights. And if you're a company admin or a Hive CMS admin, or even a library manager, you should have access to the management portal here through the Hive CMS. If you're none of those, well, then you won't have that button. In my case, I do, because I'm a company admin. So for me, one of my favorite ways to get to the Hive management portal is just clicking on the button out of the Hive CMS. It helps me not have to remember any web addresses. When I click this, this opens up in my web browser to the web address here of https, don't forget the S, it's important, hive21.ctcsoftware.com. That's the main website. You don't need the #CMS there. You can go directly to that, and that'll take you to the main Hive homepage right here. If you click on the management portal button right here, it'll actually drop you on the CMS tab, which is where that #CMS came from there. And here I can go in and do some library management, some tags, and some settings. The key is, in that PowerPoint, the first step, step one, that I always recommend someone take a look at first thing is CMS Settings Organization. Right here, there's a number of options that you can modify. And when you modify these and you save them, they apply to all Hive users across the firm straight away. Now, the first one that I recommend you always just consider and check if you can is the Allow Cloud Content Caching. I believe by default it's on, but just make sure. I also recommend you prefer cloud content. And again, I believe that's default checked on, but just in case, never hurts to make sure you just double check that. There's a number of other options like where caching locations are, where Hive update log files are, and to automatically clean up after itself after a certain amount of time. You can set all these things, but just be aware of some of these major settings. The ones that I always look at right away, again, allow cloud content caching, that's checked, and prefer cloud content. You may also notice I personally uncheck allow downloads. I don't like allowing my users to right-click on content in Hive and then choose to manually download it to some location in their computer. I don't like that, so I turn it off and I make people double-click on it so that it'll open up in the right tool. They can always save as, of course, or it'll load the right content into Revit directly. Either way, that's my preference. Then I click Save, and it actually successfully saves my settings. That is, the basic step one right there. Okay. Once I have that, my step two is always to jump up to libraries. And there are 4 libraries that I recommend most firms generate right away when using this in collaboration with Hive. The very first library is Revit Content for you, your company. In my case, Revit Content CTC. This is actually used by all corporate Revit users in my firm. I use that library. Now, you might subdivide this. You might have architectural content separate from electrical content, separate from mechanical content, if you have large enough groups to justify that. If you don't, then just put it all in one library and save yourself the headache. The real reason for these libraries is to control who can see what and how they can interact with it. So if you're mid-sized company and you can put all your content, your corporate content into one library, do that. It'll save you a lot of extra management. But that's library number 1. Library number 2 here is Revit Content out of the box if you choose to release the out of the box content of Revit to your team. Maybe you don't want to do that. Some people do, some people don't. So for now, I recommend generating that as a separate library that is not your corporate content. People will then know it's out of the box. They can very easily filter it out of their search results by forcing it to search their Revit content for your company if you want to, but that stuff is then available. The next library is standards and procedures. I like having the standards just directly available in front of me when I'm working in Revit. I don't have to exit Revit to go search some other site. I have my standards right there. Take all your PDFs if you want, if you don't already have an internal corporate intranet site, and throw them all into Hive. Makes them all searchable, and you're good to go. There's other techniques you can do as well, which we might talk about in a future webinar about how to get web links and things easily into Hive. We'll talk about that in a later set. But standards and procedures. This is all my BIM standards, my training documents, things like that. And the last one here is templates. All of my Revit project templates, all of my Word document templates, all those things go into templates. I just make the library, and it's really easy to do. You make a library by hitting the new library button up here at the top right corner. You give it a name like Revit, content, XYZ company, whatever. And I like to just kind of give a consistent naming convention so that, you know, things are nice, neat, and simple. And I hit create. If I'm going to make all 4 of them, I'll hit create new. And then I'll go to the next one, Revit out of the box stuff, create new, you know, whatever. So I do that a lot. Okay, those 4 libraries are the first 4. I'm not worried right now about rights. I'm worried about just making the buckets. That's all I care about right now. My next step is going to be to get out of the website for a minute. I'm just going to minimize it here. And I'm going to jump into the Hive CMS itself. And I'm going to start loading it up with content, just throwing stuff in there. And so what I'll probably do is open up another Windows Explorer window here. Let's pull this across the screen, and I'll go find some content like I'll go to my out-of-the-box 2021 library. Let's see here, Autodesk, Revit 21, libraries, and we'll use English Imperial here. I'm just going to take the whole English Imperial library. I'm just going to drop all of it over here. I hope there's not a lot of subfolders there. So dropping this on top of Hive. Drag and drop, not a big deal. I think I'm dragging and dropping on Hive. Maybe I didn't. I think Hive's actually thinking. But what it's going to do is load up all the content inside that folder into the Hive environment over here and basically get me ready to start dropping this into the Hive environment, having it read it into the Hive environment. Now, when you do this, it's a good idea to have at least one version of Revit open. And I personally will open up the very latest version of Revit that I have installed when I'm adding content. If it's just families coming out of a library, I'll just add the latest Revit version here so that Hive can pick up on that and begin processing that content. Oh, look at this. There's a bunch of text files in here that I don't want. I'm going to get rid of all those. Let's just remove those selected elements. Get rid of that garbage. I don't want that. Remove. There we go. All I want are, hello, must have had a couple of extra things in the list. I want just Revit families in the list. And maybe I want to filter this a bit more. I was a little lazy about dropping the entire thing. Sometimes I'm a little more selective here. But I'm going to let this process in my latest design app. And if I was dropping Revit 2018 content, I would do the same thing. If I was dropping 2019 content, I'm processing all of it from 2021 just because I don't feel like having multiple versions of Revit open. And I do have to tell it what library to go to. In this case, this is Revit out of the box. That Revit content XYZ that I made earlier, that should, if I saved it, already be in my list here. But for now, I'm just going to go ahead and say Revit content out of the box. I've got a full list, and I would click process. Now, if I gave it a couple thousand families, like this right here, I give it about 3,500 families, I'm probably going to let this just run overnight. I'm not going to babysit it because I don't need to. I just want it to run and add to my library. But while that's processing, I'm going to go to my next step. I'm not going to actually process this right now, guys. You don't want to watch this thing open and load Revit stuff. So we're not going to actually process this right now, but you normally would do that. My next step, step 4, which I tend to do, and by the way, when this stuff is opening previous version content, it opens and temporarily upgrades it so it can scan the data. But Hive with the Revit family content is not saving the content. It's just opening it to scan it, and then it closes it and uploads the original file. So you don't have to worry about upgrading your families. There's another thing about this. I'll come back to this a little later on, talking about project-hosted content. Project-hosted stuff does have to actually be processed from its proper version of Revit because Hive does save that. Well, I guess I'm not going to come back to that. I just mentioned it. When you are adding Revit project elements, you will want to have the proper version of Revit open. You will want to make sure that you've opened up that warehouse model in that version of Revit, adding project hosted elements, wall types, duct types, schedules, drafting views, typical sheets, things like that, model groups, detail groups, all those things. And adding that into Hive, you do want to have the correct version of Revit open because especially if you're uploading content to the cloud, it is going through and saving little micro files to make Hive as efficient as possible when it drops content from the clouds. And I did see a question that asked why I was deleting the type catalogs and other text files from here. And that's because I don't need them in the list. I don't want users to search the type catalog. I want them to search for the family. Hive will already scan the type catalog and associate it with the family. But if I have the type catalog here as well, when they run a search for something like area tag, if that had a type catalog, the area tag type catalog would pop up as well. And that's not relevant. I don't want people looking at text files. I want them looking for the families and having the type and the type information scanned. So that's why I got rid of all that text garbage that I didn't need. Okay, let's continue on with the management side here. Back in the Hive web portal, we've done step 1, which was the organization settings. We've done step 2, which is to create the library buckets. Oh, I didn't actually save the library. That's why I didn't make it, because I didn't save it. Okay. We did step 3, which is to drop a bunch of content in, tell it what library to go and click process, which usually I'll do it near the end of the day so I can go home or step away from the computer while it's processing when I'm not watching it and babysitting it, because I don't have to babysit it. Step 4 is user groups and assigning them to libraries. So I go to users and groups. I skip the users part for right now, and I go to groups. And with user groups, library, I make a few of them, just different buckets, so I can control rights across my firm. The most important right that I use almost all the time is an everyone group. I like having everyone in the list so that I can just say, look, all people can find this library. And this is usually for library by library or for my projects. I make it so everybody can see certain projects if I want to. I also have a BIM manager group. I also have a project managers group for people who do project management, but my BIM managers usually are the ones that manage my CMS and most of my libraries and their content. And so I make these libraries as just different groups of people, Dynamo users maybe. Maybe I've got a group for external people, consultants and partners that are contracting with my firm. Maybe they're not a part of the everyone group. Maybe I value their opinions a little less, or I want them to find different content, or whatever the case may be. I mean, you can make whatever groups are reasonable for you. And making a group, little plus sign right here, similar to projects or similar to libraries, you make a group, you just give it a name. So throw a name in here. I don't know. I'll make this my architecture group. If I have, I want to assign certain rights for the architecture people to the architectural library, if I have that broken apart, or to certain project types, maybe I just have an architecture group here. I can continue. Just make the group, that's all it is, and it saves the group, and then I move on. That's it. I'm going to cancel in this case. I don't need to actually make the, well, I guess I did make the group twice. Let's get rid of one of those. Just have one architecture group here. So you can put in a group name, hit go, put in another group name, hit go, and it just keeps making groups for you for whatever groups you need. The first one I make always is everyone. I also typically make a BIM manager and typically make a project manager if I'm using the project activity logger. Now these groups, if you wanted to, you can also pre-assign, like with my BIM managers, I can pre-assign rights. Like anybody who's in this group, I'm going to make them a CMS admin. And this way I can almost completely ignore user rights individually. Right? These users are all going to be admins of the CMS regardless of what their personal rights are. If they have no rights, whatever, they're going to be CMS admins because they're my BIM management group. That means whatever library I make, they automatically get full control to it. They get full control across the full Hive CMS as well because they're a CMS admin. Now, maybe I don't really want them. Maybe I just want them to be library managers, not full CMS admins. But you have the ability to control the granularity of this if you need to. Like my project managers here, I've also made them all project admins. Whoever's a part of that group, they're project admins. In fact, Newt over here, Newt is a project admin. It's his only base rights. If I sign out and sign back in as him, all I have is the projects tab and some dashboardy stuff around projects. That's it. So you get that level of control with those users. Just make the buckets. That's step 4. And a part of step 4 is to jump back to CMS into your libraries and assign rights as well. So let's actually go through the exercise of making that Revit content for XYZ, and let's create that. So it should successfully make that. I should have now Revit content XYZ, perfect. And if I edit this library, now that I have those groups, I'm going to go to permissions and I'm going to add some rights here. So I'm going to say, let's add everyone as a contributor. This means they can comment and they can give me feedback on my library. So I can add them to this group. I can also, if I care to explicitly do so, if I hadn't already assigned the CMS admin level rights, this would be required, but I'm going to add my BIM managers here as a manager level in case I ever decide to remove those rights. At least they'll still be a manager of this library. I can add them here, and then I can save my library. Later, when I add my Revit users and I put them in different groups, they'll automatically get access to certain content because I'm assigning that right now. This makes it really easy for you while content is being processed to just make some choices about how do I want people to get access to this stuff. When you're thinking about your libraries and your groups, they kind of work together to make sure people are seeing the right stuff and getting the right things. So when I save this, now that Revit content XYZ will be visible by everyone and everybody can comment on it. Everybody in my corporation, in my Hive environment, they can give me some feedback because I made the users of this library contributors. All right, let's take a look at a reason why I might want them to be consumers only. Standards and procedures right here in my permissions, I've already set this up. My BIM managers are a manager level role, meaning they can add content to this library. They can do whatever they need to for this library. But again, my BIM managers being CMS admins, they've still got God rights across the entire CMS, so they can do whatever here. But everyone else in my firm has been listed here as a consumer level role, not a contributor, meaning they cannot rate, comment, give me feedback, you know, whatever in this library. All they can do is search it. That was a very intentional choice because in my standards and procedures, the last thing I want is a user getting into this environment and being like, well, in my previous firm, we did things this way. I don't like the way you do the thing. And then other people start giving me comments on this area. That's not what I want in Hive. What I want when they're giving me feedback is stuff like, oh, this family is broken when it gets dropped into a wall narrower than, 4.5 inches or something. That's meaningful to me because then I can take actions to fix that. Causing dissension around like how a standard is done, that's not my intent. If I wanted the opinions there, I would invite them to a standards discussion and we would, hash out what we're going to do for standards. So here, I have very intentionally made them only able to find and open this stuff. That's it, by making them consumers. Now, I do have a bunch of other libraries here in the mix, like my Civil 3D site design library. Right now, only my BIM managers have any kind of access to this. Everyone has not been added to this library. Therefore, when a normal Revit end user signs into the CMS who isn't the BIM manager, they're not even going to see this available for them to search. Hive won't look at it. It will not give them results from it. It makes it really easy for you to just limit what they can see. And this is also meaningful. If you decide that you need to segment your libraries out where you've got Revit content for architecture, Revit content for electrical, Revit content for mechanical, when you put stuff in there, I can make the other disciplines not even able to see the library. So they don't even get search results for it. They don't have to filter them out because they don't exist to them. So you can actually control who gets what. All right. Let's see here. Final step. Step 5 for Hive in relation to the CMS is to go to users and groups and actually add your users. So up here, hit the little plus sign, put in the name, the email, what office they're a part of if you care about their geolocation, what department they're a part of if you care about those kinds of metrics. Give them a default password if you want to, need to, continue, move on to the next user. And while you're doing this, you can also assign the groups and roles after you've added this user. In my case, I'm not going to actually add somebody. I'm going to go take a look at somebody who's already been added, like Newt here. Newt has been added. Once added, their email address is there. This is an active user. They're in the St. Paul office, a part of the architecture group right here. I can force change their password if I need to. And I can always come back and say, hey, Newt, you're a project admin. Or you know what? I'm going to strip that and just save this. It won't matter because you're a part of project manager, so they already have those rights. But in this case, when I save this, it's just going to update Newt's records, and he'll still be a part of project managers. Or if I find out Newt's a really good, user of Revit, maybe I want to make them a BIM manager, and I can add them then to the list. I can just select that, choose save, and it'll add Newt to the BIM manager list, which now makes them also a CMS admin because of the group rights of this, right? If the group rights confuse you a bit, you don't have to assign rights at the group level. You can leave those all blank and just assign rights at the user level if you want to. Your choice. Do whatever you need to do here. So there was a question, I think, that I saw come in of, can I automatically or more automatically here assign offices and departments? And the answer is yes, soon. You will be able to, using an Active Directory synchronization that's coming soon, that will allow you to actually pull the office and department as stored in AD into this environment for your users. Yes, we're aware that's not there right now. Yes, we are working frantically to get it out for you so you can use that. And we'll do an update on this particular webinar to talk about how to leverage that tool when it becomes available. But for now, you can enter them if it's meaningful, or you can wait until later if you care. But this can and will sync to AD in the not too distant future for you. And that includes, in the future, we have plans of also looking at how we can potentially sync user groups. Initially, it'll probably only sync the users. You can adjust the groups yourself in Hive how you like. Okay, that's the 5-step process for Hive CMS management. Once again, settings organization, step 1. Create your libraries, step 2. Upload a bunch of content, step 3. At the same time, you can do your step 4, which is doing your groups management. That's step 4, and assigning those to libraries. And then your final step, step 5, is to add the users into the Hive environment. You may choose to add some of your BIM admin users before you're totally done with the Revit content add. And that's fully understandable. But I recommend the general 5-step process the way that I do, so that when you do add your everyday Revit users, your designers, your architects, your engineers to Hive that aren't helping you admin, they don't get the invite, try to sign into Hive and go, well, how come nothing's there, right? Because you've gone through the process and you've already added content to the Hive environment before you added those users. For those of you who have been using Hive for a while already, well, most of this is already done. All of those steps have already been taken because you did that in the previous edition of Hive. And when you upgraded, all the things are already there. Your content's there, your libraries are there. Maybe you want to go through and kind of take a look at some of the new rights and abilities on each user. Maybe you want to modify who is an org admin, because in the past version of Revit, there was pretty much a company admin or you were a library manager, and there wasn't anything in between. And now I can take a user and strip the org admin and make them just a CMS admin, meaning they don't have access to users and groups, and they don't have access to projects. I can make some people just project admins, maybe some people like my IT group just user admins, and they won't have access to other parts of the interface in the management portal here if you do that. So for those of you who have been Hive users for a while, it may be meaningful for you to go through and take a look at those user rights and maybe refine them a bit. Okay. There was a question about, do we have documentation explaining those roles? We are getting out the BIM management, the Hive Manager documentation, which you'll probably see show up here in the Hive 21 page very shortly. For now, pretty much what you got is what we got in this webinar right now, but in a couple of weeks, you'll see that show up on the Hive UI itself. Okay, let's jump back into the PowerPoint here for a second, and we're going to talk about administering the project side. Let's see here. How come it won't show up? There we go. Project task checklist here. Similar to the library management checklist, I got a couple of steps here that I recommend you take a look at if this is the part you're most interested in, or even in the future. There's project settings and getting your license file. There's project creation, path mapping as users are opening and saving projects, and access group configuration. We've already talked about groups a little bit. We're going to talk about this in relation to projects directly. Okay. Within the Hive system, let's go back to a live demo here. Within the Hive system itself, from projects, what I'm going to do is talk about the creation of a new project. And this really is just about the exact same as making a new library, right? Click new on libraries. I create a new library, just give it a name. Projects, pretty much the same thing. You click new, you give it a project number. It's a little bit more involved because there's more information here, but you give it a project number. I like to give it a name. That's required. It's not required. The project number is required. I like to tell it which office it's coming out of so I can use this for metrics later. There's some other information. The vast majority of this is optional. And I also recommend setting some kind of issuance date so you have an idea of when upcoming deadlines are. There's other properties, lots of properties in here. You can ignore the vast majority of them other than project number. That's required. And I recommend setting issue date. At this point, you just click next and you close out. You're done. It's making a bucket for a project. You don't have to directly add paths yet. So if I made one for today, let's just make a project number. We'll use today's date as the example. 2020-05-19, project name, some project, doesn't matter. Issue date, I don't know, we got a couple months out, we've got an issuance for the first package, okay? Next, I'm done. I've made a project. That's it. I'm not going to go through the exercise of adding paths myself yet. I don't want to. I don't need to. We'll talk about adding paths in a minute here. You can, if you've already got groups set up, add some permissions. So you can click next here, add some permissions. Maybe what I want to do is have everyone be a viewer of this project, and so I can add that to my list. Or if I have a specific group of people that are going to be project admins, I might add them as a project admin, as a manager for this project. Those of my company who are a part of the project manager group, they're already admins of the projects, and they can do this exact same step as well. They'll have the ability, because they're project administrators, to add projects and to do full administration here. If I do have a project, I think this guy right here, my MEP project, where I've got some permissions set up. Yeah, my project managers right now are set up as managers. They're also admins, so they have full access anyway. But if I had a group of people, maybe my BIM managers, maybe I'll add them. We'll do BIM managers as a manager level of this project specifically. And as I add them, these users in this BIM manager group will now have edit rights to this project, this specific project, because they're a manager here. Once again, my project managers, this is kind of redundant because they're admins across the whole project system. So I can go ahead and close this out. Now, we do not have the ability to add individual users here because most companies want to have like a group of people be project managers, and so we don't have user-specific adding here at the project level. It's just user groups. Libraries for Hive, you can add just users if you want to, because you might be inviting people from outside your firm to look at your libraries. You can do one user at a time if you want to invite them. But most companies are more interested in managing a full group or a full project group of people. You can make as many groups as you need to, so feel free to do that. Okay, so I've got that all set up. That was step one. Step two. I skipped step one. Step one was actually project settings, and I skipped that step. So I'm going to go to project settings, and in here, there's a few options you've got. Now, I have most of mine turned off right now. I'm going to turn a few of these on. I do want to log which Revit add-ins I have installed and are in use on my computers when I have the project activity logger installed. I do like logging when people audit models when they open them. I like to log how fast view switching is. When they access certain views, I like knowing how fast those views regen. Logging printing for me is interesting as well to understand how long those tasks took. There is an option here to log activity for non-work shared models. This will technically log everything about every model that people open in Revit. Most people are usually not interested in this unless your firm works primarily in non-work shared models. By default, the project activity logging only looks at work shared projects, which includes those up on BIM 360. I personally leave this turned off because I don't feel the need to understand when somebody opens up a non-work shared model. I also personally like having summarized flags, or summarized warnings rather. I like that because I don't necessarily need all of the full detail of every element ID, all the things. I like just knowing how many warnings are there and what they generally are. If you want more detail, you can certainly get detailed warnings. Now, this might take a little longer on saving of a project for the end user because it has to dig a little deeper into the warnings environment to pull more data, and it's a slightly larger file being sent up online. So it's more chatter across the internet. But that's your call. If you want that, you can certainly do detailed warnings. I'm going to do summarized warnings here. And then I'm going to save my settings. Save that. It's going to set it all up. I'm also going to download my config file here. This is the license and configuration file that you need to make the project activity logger communicate to Hive. Just installing it doesn't make it communicate to Hive. You have to tell it which company you are, and so you have to download your corporate config file, which should show up. Yep, here we go. Hive config. This is the third time I've done this. hiveconfig.json. And you put this file specifically in the program data CTC licensing folder. I'll show you what I mean. I'm going to open up my C drive. Oh, wrong monitor. Let's pull this across for you. C drive program data CTC. Where is it? Licensing. Here we go. And right there is my hiveconfig.json. That file is what tells Hive where and how to log the data. If this isn't here, the PAL is just collecting information and not doing anything with it. So this helps it communicate with your company, and it also then knows what data to actually log because it gets your company settings from that. So push that out. Every user computer that gets the PAL needs this licensing file, this JSON, put in the licensing folder, and it'll know then exactly how to work. If you make changes to these settings here, you do not have to redownload your config. The config just says, look to the settings that are in the cloud and do a thing with them. So you can change your settings whenever you want, and your PAL will start to just work correctly accordingly. So that's technically your step one. Check your settings, save them, get your config file, and distribute that when you install Hive PAL in general. Your second step, as I already mentioned, was the projects, making the projects. Your third step, as people start opening and working on projects, any paths that Hive doesn't understand will be here in the paths unmapped. In my case, I've got a few, like this one right here. This one was one that I just recently opened, and Hive didn't know about this originally. So I'm going to take this path, and I'm going to associate it to a project that I've already got. So I've got a 2020 0510 project here. This is the project that is my MEP productivity path, where this path needs to be associated. And I'm simply going to save that. And what it will do is associate this path with the project. The next time I refresh, that path goes away. I've got a few other demo paths here. I can take multiple paths all at once. I can even search for paths. I can put in things like !RET and have it start to discover those paths that exist in my list here. Grab those paths and associate them with a project, right? So you can search for project numbers, you can search for whatever you need. There's even a check all here, so you have to check each of the individual paths if it finds more than one. But you take those paths and you associate them to a project that you've got defined. And then when you jump over to your dashboard and you start looking at stuff, it will understand the logical grouping of your Revit project models to a logical project bucket. And it will also give users access to view those as they access that dashboard as well. When I jump over to projects here, if I'm, Bob the architect and I'm a part of project number blah, and I've been given rights to that through a group, then I will see those projects, the project information here, my project deadlines. I'll see things like the model performance of my projects to which I've been given rights. You know, the ability to go in here and say, oh yeah, that model right there, that's how fast it's been opening and saving over time, and that's how many warnings it's had over time. You can get these metrics if you've been given rights to that. Okay, that's the key. Okay, let me see here. The final thing really is group configuration. Since we've already covered groups, I'm not going to go too in depth, but you may want to have, depending on how your project teams are broken apart, a new group that you make for a project team, and then throw those users into that group and associate that group to the project as view or as manage rights, up to you. In my case, I don't have a lot of sensitive projects. I just let everyone see all my projects, and so my everyone group right here is actually associated as a viewer on every project that I make. My choice, of course, how I set up my projects, your choice, how you want to set up your projects. If you did have some sensitive projects, maybe I'd have like a government project group, and then maybe just those users can see those projects associated to that client. Or maybe I've got a specific client group. I want to have, you know, such and such a client group, which may also have such and such access to the library specific to that client in the CMS, right? So that group definition applies to both the libraries that might set up and the projects for that particular client as well. There's a lot of strategies you guys can use to set this stuff all up. All right. Let's see here. One other major thing, when you're dealing with the setup of, there we go. When you're dealing with the setup of this, a lot of the times we're not just sitting at our desks. Maybe I've walked over to a user's workstation and I'm talking with them. Instead of signing in on their computer to the cloud, to the web system, if you want, you may certainly leverage your smartphones, your smart tablets, whatever, and just put the shortcut to the Hive 21.ctc software site on the desktop of that. I do that all the time. No, it's not technically an app, but you know what? It works pretty much the same as an app. And so you can just use this path again, https://hive21.ctcsoftware.com. That'll get you to the main Hive 21 site, make that your shortcut, and gives you quick and easy access. You can even do that technically to your own desktop on your computer as well. So you can simply click that and it'll bring you directly to the site if you didn't have, say, the Hive CMS at your fingertips. I did see a couple of questions about the logging in and logging out of Hive all of the time. Let me kill this for a second here. Do you have to sign in every single time when you open Hive? Let me close this stuff all out. I'm just going to open up Hive again here from my desktop. You don't always have to sign in. In fact, Hive normally will cache your user credentials. The only reason I had to sign in this time was because I was changing my connection to the office and it changed the security token that I had gotten for this. But when I've signed into Hive, it should just keep me signed in. And normally when I click on the management portal, it just keeps me signed in there as well. I'm just dragging this across. I'm already signed in. So I don't need to worry about signing in every single time. Now that token does need to be refreshed, and sometimes Hive will force you to re-sign in, but for the most part, it keeps you signed in, so you're not needing to sign in every single time. I also do a lot of signing out and signing back in as other users because I want to test and make sure things work as I expect. I have a couple of test users in my company, like my Joe Demo account, and I like to show sometimes how those look. So the reason why mine often has me signing in is because I've probably just signed out recently and or changed from a VPN connection to a local desk connection. And the system has to re-authenticate me at that point. For many of you, you'll probably just be using your computers straight as they are. Maybe you aren't switching VPNs a lot, and therefore Hive will probably keep you signed in most of the time. The only time it won't is if you are often using an incognito window. It'll be a one-time sign-in because incognito windows don't cache your credentials anywhere. So There was a question that I did see roll through about how did I map a project. In fact, hang on one second here. Let's jump back into that PowerPoint just for a minute, because I do want to make sure we cover one more thing, and then I'll come back and answer a bunch of questions here. So in case you don't already have Hive, or the latest version of Hive, and you're still sitting on the older install of Hive and you want this newer stuff, how do you get it? Great question. Well, if you go to just ctcsoftware.com right here, just the base website. In fact, I'll just go here and type it in, ctcsoftware.com, basic website for us, the main page. If you go to the products to Hive, there's a get started option here. If you don't already have Hive, you can try it free for 14 days. Sign up for a trial, try it out, see if Hive is right for you. If you already have Hive and you're on the older one and you want to get upgraded, right here is a link to our blog post about how to get the latest updated Hive. In fact, right here also is the download that I was using earlier today with all the files that you need to install the Hive CMS, the Hive PAL, the instructions behind it. All of that is in this download right here. And also some basic instructions about what you need to do to be able to use both the new Hive and the new project activity logger. Okay? Go through this. This will be a really good way for you to get this installed if you haven't already done so in your firms. Your content, if you already have Hive, the original Hive, your content is already there. Any projects you'd set up before can be there if you want them. Some of you never used the project activity side, so it won't matter to you. But if you were using the old beta of the project activity and you wanted that information copied forward, let us know. Send us an email, and we'll get that ticketed to actually have your project content upgraded. But the CMS content is already there for you. Thank you all, and have a fantastic day.